we are just like one big community, that when people from the States come up and they realize that like my best friends live a whole province over, and like that's crazy to them because they're like, oh, how do you know all these people from like all like half of your country, which is like to them is mind-blowing because you don't see people from California frequenting shows in Indiana. You know what I mean? Like it's just, it doesn't cross over like that.
Right. Headphones are on my head.
Yeah, right.
Well, I think we're ready to rock. Thank you so much for tuning in, everyone. This is another episode of the Scoped Exposure podcast. Welcoming on one of my dearest hardcore friends, the number 2 bad bitch as far as I'm concerned, Jessa from right here in Calgary.
Hello.
And of Damage Control. Thank you for joining me on the podcast today.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
Jessa and I have, been friends for a long ass minute, have, been connected in different hardcore scenes over our lifetime, which I think has cemented a lot of things. And it was without a doubt an absolute must for me to bring you on as a guest of season 2 of the podcast. So I really appreciate you sitting down with me today.
Of course. Thanks.
Before we get super into it, we got to do the Bev check, and it sounds like you came prepared. So I'm
ready to go.
Trying to make it, a standard here for the guests to go first. So tell the people at home what you got going on.
That's so polite of you. So I was gonna do coffee, of course, but we're recording this at what time is it? Like just after 10:30, 10:45 in the morning.
11. Yeah.
I've been awake for like 4 hours. I've been awake since 6:30. I've had my coffee. So I present you with this. Anybody that knows me knows that I hate sparkling water. I think it's disgusting. It tastes like watered down juice that's fizzy. Not my thing. But PC brand, like from Superstore, has these new ones that are like pop flavored. So they have cream soda and root beer and cola. And like, I'm drinking a ginger ale right now. And they're fantastic. They're really good. They're like calorie-free, sugar-free, like soda. It's chef's kiss. They're good. And then a wise woman, I'm all about the hydration today. A wise woman, Mishy, once told me that all hot girls have jars of water to stay hydrated. So
yeah, well,
what we have.
Mishy for sure is a wise woman, and I think hydration is, the number 1 bev out of anything. I am rocking. I've neglected a crucial bev grocery run, so. We ordered this so we could get free delivery on Skipped Bev. So it's just a vitamin water, orange flavored. So going to be doing the hydration and the calcium bump today. So
incredible.
No, that's too funny. I think I was talking with Chelsea from the Tune, and we were just talking about different bevs, and I honestly think I need to do a proper sparkling water like bev gauntlet, like have everything, do every single, cheap sparkling water bev to the fancy shit, and just, give it a point value system on like price, taste.
See, they're all the same to me. I've like, no. Yeah,
well, just
like, give me plain water. But
tune in for that one at least.
Yeah.
Well, like I said before, Jessa and I have been friends for a minute. And Jessa has helped me a lot over the last couple of years on the show / scoped aspect of things. Jessa had a huge hand in putting on the 2-year anniversary and what would have been the 3-year, but that obviously didn't happen. Obviously, all those plans will be carrying over to future years. But yeah, I'm excited to be chatting about booking shows and some other things. But Jessa is obviously an avid listener of this podcast, and you know how things kind of get started. So tell me how
Yeah.
you got into hardcore. Give me the origin of how heavy music entered your life, and then we'll kind of get into the conversation there.
I can't believe I'm about to put this on the record for the first time, like officially. Yeah, so I'm from Winnipeg originally. I live in Calgary now, but kind of Winnipeg is where it all started. I again can't believe I'm putting this on the record officially. Was exposed to hardcore, punk, metal, the heavier side of music from like very, very young age. Most people's parents listen to like country and like classic rock, but like hardcore was in my household a lot. Punk was in my household. In my family, I have a lot of musicians in my family. The whole band thing definitely runs deep over here. And I fucking hated hardcore until I was like in high school. I was yeah, it's crazy. It was around me constantly, and I didn't have one of these moments where I heard like Linkin Park for the first time and was like, "Ooh, what's this?" Anything with a guitar and like loud screaming just like was not for me. I spent years and years the same way a lot of people I feel like with their parents, like old like country music, they're like, that's like not my thing, that's not great. That was me with this. So yeah, that it was always around, and I really was too busy listening to like Lil Wayne. I was like, I'm just gonna sit over here, like give me my radio rap and like leave me alone. I don't want to listen to that. And then somewhere along the line, like high school came, and this was in the 2000, it was like around 2010, 09. I was going into high school, and that was like the defend pop punk phase of
the
life.
man overboard flag over the bed.
Oh yeah, no, like 100%. The Wonder Years, the Mayday parades, and that stuff, and that kind of was my start, I guess, to like anything that wasn't like Missy Elliott, like Drake.
Right.
And from there it just kind of escalated. I think live music had a huge part to play in that, though. Being from Winnipeg, I feel like that's a common theme because that's all we really have to do is go to shows. So it went from going to like the big pop punk shows and like the like metro station and like shows at the West End Cultural Center to then going to local like metalcore shows. And then one day I heard, I want to assume it was like Cold World, and it like my world was like absolutely rocked. And then of course, like growing up in the local Winnipeg scene, bands like Comeback Kid were those bigger shows that we would go to when we weren't going to the local, like there's 40 people in the Ellis Theater.
Yeah, or Crescent Fort Rouge United Church or whatever.
Yeah, or like going to a show in like Altona or like Winkler. So yeah, like bands like Comeback Kid definitely have a lot to do with where I am now, where my taste is now, because it kind of gave me that entryway from the music I don't even really listen to or like at this point. I think it just had a lot to do with the community and being in that environment that drew me in. And then it wasn't until I actually started going to like real like hardcore shows that my passion for like the music actually kind of started. So
yeah, there's a lot of different things to unpack there, but I think it's very interesting on how either people will have that upbringing where they'll have an older brother or an older sibling where they're like showing them those records and they're like, they respect and look up to that sibling. So they're like, yeah, I want to listen to the Slipknots and the Corns and Limp Bizkits.
Not me.
But yeah, on the opposite side where it's like, maybe that was a little bit more common in your house and you're like just naturally as a teenager, you're like, oh, I gotta be my own person and not be, my family or whatever. Yeah, but that is really interesting to kind of come around full circle. And it sounds like Cold World being that band that had that like hardcore like heaviness, but also that like almost hip hop vibe to them as well.
Yeah, I think it was Cold World would have been the first band that I ever heard do the two like together.
Yeah.
I guess like even just with having like hip hop intros and stuff, like that was something I never, of course, like mostly at that point being exposed to like the metalcore side of things where it's like anything that's not metalcore is like bad, like it's bad. So I think that kind of opened a whole other door for me. And now it's like I'm in my mid, like getting into my late 20s, and I'm not even rediscovering. I'm like personally for myself discovering bands for the first time. And it's like actually embarrassing because these are bands that people around me have been listening to for 10 plus years. And I'm over here going, have you guys ever heard Kickback? Like, this is crazy to me because, and like, I told somebody in my family that I did a deep dive into Kickback and like, I really love them now this summer. And he hung up the phone on me and didn't talk to me for like 3 days. And I was like, but that's like a testament to how much shit I talked as a teenager and like as a young person being like, this isn't for me. This sucks. Like, I hate this music. Yeah. And then now like a decade plus later, coming back around going, oh, like this, I really like fucked myself out of having like a lot of really cool experiences probably and knowledge that now I'm just looking back and like, 14-year-old Jessa, what were you doing?
Yeah. I think like, you know, maybe in the last couple of years, you've definitely seen the not the awareness, but the exposure that hardcore doesn't have just a one streamlined route of how to get into it. Like now there's all these people that went through like, you know, the scene core, the MySpace metalcore aspect. And there's people that came from punk music and all these, you know, different things and everything in between. So hardcore is weird because it is such a knowledge aspect when it comes to not only knowing the new bands who are coming up, but also the bands who like really actually laid the groundwork. So it's such a, you know, it's not like, oh, you want to be into hardcore, here's your you know, masterclass to know everything. Unless you have people, you know, within your circles who are like, oh, you like this, you probably like, you know, if you're liking bands like you know, like I'm like Sanction, like Disembodied and all these other like older metalcore bands, like you should learn about those as well.
Yeah, I definitely have a handful of people like that around me who are just like encyclopedias of hardcore, and it's super crazy because I can't imagine having that much information in my brain. But it's just knowing that I could have. Yeah. And like after the Kickback thing, I like have been fully like, I'm not getting any of the cool records. Like I'm not getting any of the 3 decades old merch. Yeah, no, that none of that's being passed down to me. I think I bombed that one.
Yeah, but like realistically speaking, like people getting into this, like it does become obsessive, but like hardcore for the most part is not everyone's full-time job. So like, you know, exactly. You know, sitting down and like making time to either discover new music or listen to something is like definitely a good decision if you're wanting to learn more about that. But half the time, like some people are just lazy or they're so busy that they can't sit down to listen to new bands or new records that are coming up. So when, you know, everyone's posting their like, you know, 2020 best albums, and it's like, yeah, like the only thing that I kind of checked out was like Gulch, and I was like, there's so much stuff that I guess you had missed on the side of things. But
on that note, can we just shout out that Krate app for a second? I don't really know if people are still using it. I'm still going through it all the time. Like I just go and I'll scroll through. I haven't really posted too much lately, but the concept, immaculate. I don't know who made that. If you're out there and you're listening to this, like great job, because it got me like listening to full records again, which is something I haven't done in forever, which is like crazy because of like this pandemic. You'd think I'd have enough time, but it's got me listening to full records front to back again, thinking about them, like really like listening, not just like throwing them on in the background. And then on top of that is like, it's my favorite part about like social media in one app. Like probably my favorite part is discovering and like hearing people's opinions on music, even if it pissed me off. Like people have awful hot takes on stuff all the time, but this app is
every
like,
day there is so many awful hot takes.
so bad. But like, but this Crate app, like, it's so great because it just gives you a really like cohesive way to look through. And like, there's a couple people that I really like, really respect on that app that I follow, like just people I know through friends and stuff that have incredible taste in music, and it's helped me discover music. And I think more of that is definitely needed.
Yeah. For those that don't know, the app is called Krate with a K, Krate, and pretty much all it is like, I think it's connected to your streaming, whether it's Spotify or Apple, but you can pick an album, give it a 5-star, and then just like write about what you like about it, what you don't like about it. I think it like kind of popped up just kind of around Christmas time, if I'm remembering correctly.
Yeah, something like that. It seems like it was a really small platform and like small servers and stuff, so it was like kind of slow when they first started,
Oh
but
yeah,
even like
I remember that.
even after the first like week, I could already tell that it was getting better. Or maybe it was just that 2-day period where everyone's like, what's this? I'm going to join it and use it a bunch. And then now that, yeah, I don't know, but the concept is incredible. I just want to shout that out because I think it's a really cool idea, and I really enjoy it for what it is.
Yeah,
so.
honestly, it has been sitting on I guess my third page of my phone, and every time I see it, I'm like, yeah, I should jump on there and do that, because it's hard for newer apps to really break into like the really competitive space that is TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, blah blah blah. So I think if you're into sharing your thoughts around music, definitely check out Crate if you haven't. I want to transition the conversation into some stuff that you're involved in, Jessa, because this podcast is about you. So, like I was mentioning at the beginning, you and a plethora of other people, but mainly yourself and Nikki helped me a lot with the Scope 2 year show, and there's been other shows in the midst of that, booking showcase shows and other stuff before those were wiped off the face of the map. So talk to me about, like, we talked about how you kind of came the gauntlet of getting back into hardcore and then feeling connected to community. So what propelled you to actually start booking shows? Was there someone in the scene that kind of admired as far as booking shows, and that inspired you? Or talk to me about those things.
I wish I could say, yeah. I mean, like, shout out to everyone in Winnipeg who's ever put on shows for that community. It's funny, I was actually just listening to your episode with John this morning, and he was like a big one. Like, when I was first coming into hardcore, it was John putting on a lot of the shows happening out there. And that's kind of where it started. But the name Damage Control came out of like just that. Like, that's where me and a couple of my close friends at the time were feeling, because we were used to going to 5-6 shows a week. There was a time there where, like, I want to say around 2012, 2013, like in that kind of general time, there was, again, because of my broad taste in music, like I was really going to a lot of like local hip hop shows and a lot of local folk shows and pop punk shows. Like, there was just again, it's a Winnipeg thing. Like, I feel like when there's so many different scenes in that city, that there's always something going on. And if you just like music, there was a time where you could literally go to a show every single day of the week, if not more than one a night, because that's just what was going on in the city at that time. And there came a moment where there was just nobody to put on shows. There was like, people just kind of stopped doing it as much. And me and my friends, I feel like there was a whole generation of us that kind of came into hardcore around the same time. Like, there's a pretty big group of people, it was useless naming names, but around my age, who we all kind of came into the scene from that like metalcore, like Purple Haze. You know what? I say, no, there's no one I looked up to. Now that I'm bringing up Purple Haze, that is absolutely somebody that helped me so much in the beginning, is Heather Locknett of Purple Haze. Rest in peace to her. Such a sweet angel. She was doing a lot of the metalcore stuff when I was in high school. And she passed away a couple years ago now. I want to say like 2 years ago. But she was kind of like the catalyst that made me realize that it was possible. Because I feel like if I was relying at that time on just the hardcore scene and the guys in that scene who were putting on shows, I wouldn't have thought at 20 years old that I could do that at 19. Like that would have been so out of my wheelhouse. But it was somebody like people like Heather who definitely helped me out, like answered a lot of my questions, made me realize that it was possible for me and my other 19-year-old friends to start putting on shows. And it came out of just the lack of shows. And we were really angsty at the time. And I was like, oh, we got a name for this, like damage control. Like that's what we're doing. We're like fixing all of the shit that's been fucked up by like past people who have just like dropped it and like left it alone. And I definitely don't feel that way as much anymore, like as an adult, but as a kid, like that's definitely, I would be lying if I said that wasn't where it started, was coming out of this lack of people that were willing to put on mixed bill shows was kind of like the biggest thing, because there was a time where Winnipeg was getting really divided between the metalcore and the pop punk and the punk and the hardcore and the metal. And it's just like, that's kind of been a common theme within Winnipeg, I think, especially in comparison to at least like Calgary is really what I can compare it to, because this is the only other city that I've really been a part of the scene. And I don't see a divide quite as much as I do in Winnipeg. So we want to start putting on all ages, mixed bill shows. And first ones I did were when I was really young. I was like 18, 19. It was like my dad helping me. It was like we had Forever Eye on it. I found some of the flyers. I should have grabbed them actually for this episode, but found some of the flyers recently, going through some stuff. But Empty Hands was on it at one point, and just like that was kind of the beginning of it. And then as I moved away, came to Calgary for a bit, and went back to Winnipeg and moved into the mansion, also known as Oikos. A lot of people probably know the house I'm talking about. It was a huge 10-bedroom house on Wellington Crescent in Winnipeg that I've had the absolute pleasure of living in for a few years. A big house with like 7 to 10 people living in it at a time, all different walks of life, all different ages. And that gave me an opportunity to have a space where I could put on shows and not have to rely on the venues that I didn't have relationships with, that were few and far between at that point in Winnipeg. We're talking like 2014.
Especially for all ages, definitely.
Yeah. It was kind of like the perfect opportunity that I saw. And one of my roommates in that house is David Dobbs. Shout out David. He is really involved in a couple of different scenes in Winnipeg. He's in a band called Vampires. He does a show on UMFM. Really, really amazing dude. And he helped me a lot as far as doing sound. And because we both lived in the house, like we had the basement, which was already a jam space. And then we had just these big, grand, like open rooms. Like this was literally, when I say the mansion, like that's not like a nickname for this house. Like it's literally a mansion.
Yeah.
That was really old and falling apart that we lived in. And that was really cool. And that kind of was the peak, I think, of me learning and really getting like my footing in booking shows and having tours come through. We had Mortality Rate came through and played at one point, and a couple different other bands. And it was really like, that was kind of like the peak of it. Was me and Sade doing shows in Winnipeg there.
It was pretty crazy. Like, for those that don't know the landscape of Winnipeg, one of the cheapest places in Canada to live. Like the cost of living there is very, very low. So Wellington Crescent is like this line of like the people that have really splurged and got these giant mansions, and then there's this
all
like
politicians and doctors and like we're definitely the odd ones out on that street, that's for sure.
So the most expensive restaurant that you could like have a meal is a steakhouse on Wellington called 529 Wellington, and it's like, you know, they bring all the, you know, the meats and all that, and it's like in a house. It's like where all the Winnipeg Jets players would go and have a bite to eat or whatever. Mm-hmm. But then Jessa's living on a house that's like, it's like you said, it's 10 bedrooms, so it's giant, but it's like more like like Haunting in Connecticut style. Like it's not like a
Yeah.
modern house or anything like
Yeah,
that.
and the house itself was a co-op living space for years. Like I wish I knew exactly off the top of my head how many years, but I'm talking like my mom, who is 30 years older than me, partied in that house when she was my age.
Really?
Like I'm
That's
not
funny.
like this is how long this house has been around. It's been, at some points it was like very much a disgusting like flop house. It was a punk house for a while. It was an art house. They hosted bike jam after parties and shows and Halloween party. Like this house is pretty legendary as far as Winnipeg is concerned.
Definitely.
And I fortunately was able to experience it and have a part in that towards the end. But it was a huge thing for especially local music scenes in Winnipeg, I think, over the years, from
Yeah.
what the stories I've heard.
And I think like, definitely realizing that the opportunity that you had, that like, hey, I can have shows here, and actually like following through and doing that, because I know that there's a lot of people that they have something in the back of their mind where it's like, oh, like my dad does have a garage that really doesn't get used. Could like having those inclinations to like take a chance on like trying to do a show there, even if it's like one show and then no shows happen there.
Never happens again.
Sometimes
I think that's going to be really important post-pandemic too.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it's just a reality that we are going to lose a lot of venues. A lot of cities are going to lose a lot of really important venues to their scene, and I think that's going to be like a very pivotal thing in cities, whether they have a lot of shows come back or not many, is going to be the creativity, let's call it, that people show in their venue choices and looking for those opportunities. Like I can't even tell you how many times, I mean, we've had some horror shows of just like trying to rent out like community centers that just like don't give a shit, and like the person who runs that specific community center like will just stop answering your emails 3 days before the show and like doesn't give you any details. And like as a 20 something year old like young person putting on shows that went with like really no guidance, I had no idea what the fuck I was doing half the time, definitely caused for some stress, but we always figured it out. There was one time that Stepping Stone, it was a kind of one of those like On the Way to Wild Rose shows that was happening. We had Swing Low, we had Stepping Stone, and we had a band from Milwaukee that shall not be named. It was Stone, but we're not going to talk about them. And I forget who else played that show, but it was like mainly the three of them, and our venue like fucked us.
Oh, right.
48
Locked
hours
In played
before
this.
the show.
I forgot about
Yeah.
this show.
Okay.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
yeah, the venue fucked us like days before the show. I ended up finding this woman who ran this, she like managed this tiny little hall in like the edge of Transcona.
Yeah.
Like so far, just like people from Winnipeg aren't going to understand. Transcona is just like, no one goes there. It's just like it's a very old neighborhood. It's like on the edge of the city.
There's an infamous meme. Sorry, I had to cut you off. There's an infamous meme where it's from Lion King, and they're looking out, and it's like, there over there is Transcona. Like we don't go.
Yeah,
we don't.
Exactly. We don't go to Transcona. So I ended up like I lived in Transcona a lot of my like youth, and so I was like, you know what? I got to do anything. Like I just got to find something that's not gonna charge me $800 for a last minute like booking. And I ended up getting this tiny little like garage sized hall that was like, they were super chill, super amazing, like saved us. But I still like, man, it's been years and I still think about that and cringe. I'm just like, God, because I mean, and that was the thing, is that we always tried to push and find something. We tried to figure it out always, because like it would have been really easy to just go, yo, I'm sorry, I can't put on the show on your way to Wild Rose. Like I know that was the point. It was kind of one of those shows that's like they're on their way to Calgary but just want to kind of cover some gas and get something in on the way over, and it would have been very easy for me to just go, yo, venue didn't work out, so sorry, like see you there, I guess.
Right.
But we scrambled and it worked. It ended up being a really good show. A lot of people drove out to Transcona too, which I was like, this could go horribly, but It's fine. We'll
Yeah.
see.
I'm having flashbacks to when I had Jem from Speed on the podcast, and something that he said that really stuck with me, and it's exactly what we're talking about here, is like, it's so easy to default into no, or to like pull the plug or whatever. So
Mhm.
hardcore is always, and it's a constant uphill climb at times to like make the show happen. But I
Mhm.
feel like the stories and the overall pride to be like, yeah, we made this show happen. We got, even if it's a tank of gas for the Stepping Stone guys and the Swing Low guys, that's still a huge win. And I think
Yeah.
that mindset to like, for people on the outside who maybe just, it's their first show, and then it's like, oh, the venue changed, and in most other circles, it's like, yeah, this band canceled, so we're canceling the fest, or this
Mhm.
whatever. Like, hardcore to me is always like, okay, what else can we do? What are the ways that we can still make something cool happen?
Yeah, and I do have to shout out Sade for that, because um they were a huge part in putting on shows with me at that time, and definitely helped me not lose my marbles when
Most
things would go
definitely.
awry, kept me calm.
Yeah.
But
I did have a question just on the, I think it's interesting just having someone on the podcast who hasn't had that experience playing in a band. And we've talked like, whether we're hanging out with Marty at the dog park, or just hanging out in general, just
mhm.
like on the different things in hardcore that I guess if you have just, the only route that you've known is like playing in bands, there's certain things that people get, I guess, tripped up about, that from someone who's like either booking the show or just attending the show, is like, this actually isn't a big deal. So what's something off the top of your head where you're like, I
Ooh.
don't know why bands get so hyper focused and obsessed about this aspect of hardcore overall, where from someone who's just consuming it, it doesn't really matter.
Mhm. I was about to say that's a hard question, but the way you worded it the second time, it's pretty easy, because I don't ever want to criticize anybody playing in a band for the things that they're particular on, as far as the sound or how the set turned out or anything, because I understand like that's your art and that's
Sure.
not my place. Like, as somebody who's not a musician, like, I gotta shut the fuck up about that. Like, that's not my
Sure.
place, and I understand. Like, I totally get why people are particular about stuff like that. So I'm gonna avoid that, because I just don't think it's my place to really be like, yo, that's weird. But this came up recently, and I'm glad I have an opportunity to bring it up, because there was a lot of stuff being said about part of your interview with Isaac, and about the whole like, oh, you just drop a demo and then let Twitter do its thing and it blows up, and that's and then it just happens for you.
Right.
And like, then your band's just big and hardcore, and that's what it is. And there was a lot of people, and a lot of people from Canada specifically, who were really upset about that comment. And they're like, oh yeah, cool guy, like that's just how it works, huh? And I think that's one of the things, and this has a lot to do with my experience as far as being exposed to other scenes, especially in the US, that may be annoying to Canadians, and that for people in our part of the world, that may be something that's just like, oh, this is so annoying. Like, that's such a cool guy thing to say. That's such a cool guy perspective to have. Like, oh, a big dude in like these big bands think they can just post a demo and then blow up. But like, it's 2021, and that's just kind of the way it goes. Sorry. Like,
Yeah.
I hate to be that person, but honestly, like, I think that's the main difference between the experience of a band in one of these bigger cities like Philly, or now Louisville, after the amazing work that like the folks over at LDB have put into like the Louisville scene. It hasn't always been like that, but now, like, I think for our generation, Louisville is going to go down as like a very legendary city
Yeah.
to be involved in hardcore.
Hard
And
echo that.
yeah, and I think that especially people in Canada don't realize that that is just the experience. There are bands that are, small, like still small local sized bands who are playing fests like FYA or This Is Hardcore, simply because of like where they come from or who they know or what city they rep. Like, No Option's a perfect example of that. And like, respect to those guys, love them. But I think over the course of my friendship, it's like it's kids don't realize how lucky they are to be from a certain place.
Yeah.
And I think as somebody that's not in a band, I just think it's so like ridiculous when people who it obviously I understand the upset is coming from, well, my band has to put in so much more work and my band can't just drop a demo. And I think that the awareness for region and like the awareness of where you're actually from does play a huge role in that. I think is one thing that like irks me more than anything. So I'm just like, yeah, it sucks that bands like Stepping Stone have to tour relentlessly to be put on these big fests. And like touring is harder because it's hard to get across the border. And you have less people in like coming through the city as far as being from a small town in the US. You can drive a couple hours and be in a major city. It's like, it's very different. I think that's one of the as of recently, one thing that especially throughout this quarantine has really been like irking me a little bit, because it does make a huge difference. And I think people just aren't as open to that idea as they should be, in my opinion.
I think that whole topic that came up, I really appreciate like Isaac bringing it up, because it is a very interesting conversation. And I don't think that him on, talking about about that 10 minutes on his podcast covers all the bases. But, he was expressing like, it's weird for him being in two bands where like Gone the Knocked Loose or the Stepping Stone, like tour your ass off. And traditionally that was the only way for a band to actually gain credibility or, even get a shot of maybe scoring a record label. And nowadays it's like, there's so much awareness through places like Twitter and through Instagram, where it's like someone could just drop something and it's
easily.
I think the thing there's a couple of things that I want to hit on here. The first being there's been a bunch of bands, especially through this quarantine, that have quote unquote blown up or gotten a lot more attention versus a lot of the other bands that who've maybe dropped a demo. But despite that, a band could play a fest, and if they're not actually a good band and it falls flat, then people are going to stop talking about that band. Like you need to like match your product as far as your recordings with that live experience, whether it's being super crazy or being tight, like all that matters. Like there's like, I won't like call out any bands that I've seen like where I've been personally very excited to see live, and then it's kind of a letdown, whether they've been a band for 10 years or 10 minutes. So I think that's a huge point. It'll be interesting to see the bands who got like really hyped up and really, blown, not out of proportion, but, seeing how they can execute on it once shows come
It's definitely going to be interesting to see how all of this music that's dropped over the last, by the looks of it, it's going to be a year and a half, at least, from the last show that happened to the first, like, true big, like, hardcore show, not just like some secret like COVID deniers having a hardcore show in a basement somewhere, because I'm sure that's going to happen in the spring. There's no way,
or it has happened already. Like,
so oh yeah, like I could imagine. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what happens with those, because I agree. I think the live experience has such a huge impact. I'm notorious, and I'm like, I think this has a lot to do with the fact that I'm not a musician. Is that I have such a very particular thing with bands that I love seeing live. I could name handfuls that I absolutely love seeing live, and I just can't listen to them recorded. Like I'm just like, no, this isn't for me. Like, honestly, I'm gonna get crucified for this. It's like very unpopular opinion, but Ceremony is one of those bands for me. Ceremony is a crucial band for so many people. And I love seeing them live. I've seen them live a couple times throughout my life. It's at least a handful. And I love their live set. I love what they sound like live. And for some reason, it's just, I can't sit down and listen to them with some headphones. Or my God, like, I don't know what it is, but their energy live makes all of the difference for that band, for me personally.
Yeah.
And I think I could name 100 bands like that for me, vice versa, whether I prefer them recorded and then I see them live and I'm like, oh, whatever, like this is still cool in the gym, but I'm not going to go out of my way to see them, or vice versa. I don't like what I hear when a demo drops and then I see them live. I'm like, oh, this is actually dope.
Yeah. Yeah, it is strange. Like, especially I'm thinking about some of the bands that I saw at the DBK or DPK 5 year, and just like
Mm-hmm.
didn't really don't like to listen to bands prior to like learn how to do the whip pans and whatnot. I just like to have that
Yeah.
real, like, authentic first viewing or first capturing. So like,
Mm-hmm.
seeing Drain for the first time without having a ton of
Crazy.
like research about them, I was like blown away, hooked immediately. And bands like No Right that like blew me away. So like I do think, yeah, it is going to be crucial for bands who had like a pop in demo, and they're like, oh, like we gotta put our money where our mouth is, and really like tighten up our sound and do those things.
Mm-hmm.
I think the other thing too is that, like, I think what you hit on is correct. Like, there are bands that have been dealt a very good hand as far as like being born in LA and having a plethora of really talented musicians to play with and
Yeah.
jam with and play lots of shows. And like ultimately, like, I tell people this all the time: if you're a band from California, you potentially have the best hand in hardcore dealt to you, because you could build your entire like business as far as like gaining reputation and having a following just touring within California. Like, you don't
Mm-hmm.
have to do a crazy cross Canada thing. There's been bands who have like built their empires all within that state. But if you grew up in Western Canada, like, you don't have that luxury, like, especially in the day and age now. Like, so I think it's a cheap way to say, oh, woe is me, like, I have it so much harder, and just realizing
Mm-hmm.
this is the hand that I was dealt. What are my goals in hardcore? And
Yeah.
like matching your actions to what you want to happen. Like, it,
Totally.
like we were saying before, Stepping Stone could just say like, oh yeah, it's easier to not do this tour, but like those guys have worked very hard since like
Yeah.
the demo to really like not only get their name out there, but Western Canada's as well. So
Mm-hmm.
um I think it's definitely like my whole goal with Scoped has always been like, this is going back to what you're saying with Damage Control, like maybe the meaning has changed, or you don't feel that way about things as much. But Scoped for me has always been, and I think will always be, this idea of like Western Canada has a lot of really good talent, but at the same time, those bands need to like not just go within the BC Alberta space. They need to kind of take it
Mm-hmm.
out to those places on the West Coast, on the East Coast, and some of those things, because otherwise we just stay in that pocket.
Yeah. And places like California blow my mind. You've got like handfuls of different scenes in that state that, like, I can't even, they're probably, you put all of them together, they're bigger than Western Canada as a whole. Cause I feel like Western Canada is just, it is its own big scene. I think, and maybe this is my experience because I've done the jump, and a lot of my best friends live in Vancouver. So it's like I'm like connected in all the different kind of parts of it. Winnipeg, Calgary, Vancouver, kind of the main three places. And then I think that's why Wild Rose is so special too, is because we are truly like one big scene. Sure, there's little pockets. You've got like Vancouver hardcore and Calgary hardcore, and then Winnipeg hardcore, who all have their own things going on. But I think Wild Rose really, really shows us every year, most years, that we are just like one big community. That when people from the States come up and they realize that like my best friends live a whole province over, and like that's crazy to them. So like, oh, how do you know all these people from like all like half of your country? Which is like to them is mind-blowing, because you don't see people from California frequenting shows in Indiana. You know what I mean? Like, it's just, it doesn't cross over like that.
Right.
Whereas how many people do you see from Winnipeg at Vancouver shows?
Yeah.
Constantly, and like people constantly moving over. So yeah, it's a blessing and a curse though. I think it's really cool to come from a place like Western Canada, especially when it comes to hardcore, because we are so close knit. And I think that's an experience a lot of people don't have.
Yeah, I have
seeing from other
seen
places.
that trend where it's like smaller scenes that really rely on that unity on a regional aspect, to
Hmm.
just kind of push things. Like, I know I want to shout out Mass Movements or slash Promcore from Oklahoma. They've been doing a
Mm,
lot of like live streams with bands in that area, but I've seen a
cool.
lot of bands from Texas who are, you know, next door neighbors, but they'll drive up
Hmm.
and do a stream there. So I think that's cool, as like both of those. I feel like Texas has a pretty strong scene, but it's like different
Yeah.
pockets of different cities. But the fact that like there's, like you said, there's people who are like going to those shows and like playing those cities in a
Hmm.
non-COVID world on a regular basis, to be like, hey, like let's do this to kind of unify that area of the states. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, it is very trippy to be like, you know, DMing someone and be like, when's the last time I saw this person at a show? And then I'm trying to think back to that
Yeah.
show, and I'm like, oh,
Hmm.
the sadness just starts there. But I feel like
Right.
that's a good segue into a question I had here. You know, like I mentioned before, we both kind of grew up going to Winnipeg hardcore shows, and then you moved out to Calgary, and then moved back, and then I moved here, and then you moved back. And you have traveled for a lot of different hardcore fests, and I've kind of done the same with Scoped. So an overall question that I wanted to ask is, in your opinion, what's been the biggest benefit for you as far as like seeing hardcore in different places around the world?
Ooh, the biggest benefit. I I don't know. I feel weird calling it a benefit, but like definitely the connections I've made. Um, it sucks because I feel like after I went to LDB for the first time last year, Nikki has been going to LDB for years and years. And I've been going to a couple other fests like pretty religiously, but this was the first time I went to LDB and I met so many people. We had so many fun plans for the summer, just with like friends that we had met down there and or friends that we knew but got close with down there, that we're all going to be touring through Canada this past summer. And that was something I was really looking forward to. But I think that it's like the connections I've built with people all over the world is probably the biggest thing. I know for me, and like in this hardcore like circle and being in this world, it seems pretty normal because it is normal for us as hardcore kids to have friends in different cities, and like it's notorious to date hardcore kids in other cities. Like it's just like it seems, honestly, it just seems so normal. And then it's like I'll just be talking about my life to like my coworkers, for example, or like my employees or whoever, and they're like, that's so crazy. What do you mean you have friends in Philadelphia?
Yeah.
Like, what do you mean you have friends in the Netherlands? Like, that's insane. And it's just, I forget a lot of the time that is a really incredible thing, that we have connections with these people from all over, like simply because we all connect with the same type of music. And yeah, it's incredible. Some of my best friends live on the other side of the continent,
Yeah.
and I've been able to travel a lot, like simply because of hardcore. When COVID's not a thing, I do travel like once every 2 months is pretty average,
Yeah.
and it's always for hardcore,
Yeah.
whether it's for a fest, for a show, for yeah, it's
It's pretty
been
gnarly
amazing.
to be in a music uh, genre that you could meet someone that evening, and if you needed a place to stay, they would be like, yeah, I have a floor, I have a couch. Like, it's that to me seems like ludicrous if you went to like a country show and someone's like, hey,
Yeah.
I need a place to crash tonight because I'm just in town. Like, they'd be like, I just we just connected over cowboy hats and boots. Like, I'm not gonna give you my
Yeah.
living room, but like
I
hardcore
just
kids like
I
jump at
just
the opportunity. So strange.
the difference between complimenting someone's cowboy hat versus their t-shirt. Like
That brim
man,
looking fine.
fucking yeehaw.
Fucking yeehaw. But yeah,
Mm.
it's crazy. Like, you know, the very small amount of touring that I've done, and just people being like, yep, like we're staying with these people. Like, it always just seems like just like far more welcoming if you put it into perspective of all the other scenes. Like, You know, if you're going
The
to,
people I have had sleeping on my floor. Like, that's the thing, is like, is I like, I could, a million different stories of just like 7 grown men sleeping in my living room of my 1-bedroom apartment. Like,
yeah,
I've never thought about it like that, but that is weird to normal people, isn't it? That, yeah.
it's
See, it's like things like that I don't recognize as being abnormal or something that anybody would second look at.
yeah,
Because again, like my parents never thought anything of it. I'd be like, oh, I'm driving out to Regina for the show. I'll be back at 4 a.m. Like, see
yeah,
you later. I'll be back tomorrow morning. And we would drive out 6 hours after work, go to a show, and then hang around, go to Denny's and drive home. Like, that
yeah,
was insanity. Like, it's actually insane, but it's like we did it a lot, and like driving down to Minneapolis a lot,
yeah.
being from Winnipeg. And it's things that you don't realize are unique to hardcore.
Yeah. And I think going back to what I was, originally asking, I think there's such a, I think this goes outside of hardcore too, like, because people go to conferences and do all like the networking and stuff for your
Yeah.
industry or your job. But I think there is such a power in just being in the same room. Because a lot of people like that, um, I think a goal of mine when shows do come back is to go to 1 or 2 hardcore festivals or major shows that I'm not personally like documenting and holding the camera. So LDB for me is up there because I know Steven has that down packed. But I also know if he was like, "Hey, do you want to film this crazy set of X band?" I'd be like, "Yeah, I could pick up the camera for a set." But there's such a different way that my brain works when I'm just hanging out with, like, it's been a long time since I've been to a hardcore festival and just hung out with people
And not done anything.
versus like the band is like ringing in, I gotta run to the stage. But there is such a power just being in the same room and even just being like, yo, what's up, and just like introducing yourself, and then like you said, you build that friendship through an online like means, and then the next time you see that person, whether it's at a show, at a fest, they come up to your regional festival, it's like you pick up like way harder than when you originally were just like, hey, I'm Jessa, I'm from Canada, you know.
Yeah, it's crazy. Like, I've been going to Sound and Fury. That's honestly, if I could give you a suggestion, it'd be to come down to Sound and Fury with us next time it happens.
Yeah.
Whenever that is, because that's like the things that I've experienced in that room. That's probably the biggest hardcore fest I've gone to. I haven't gone to too much on the East Coast as far as like big fests. But yeah, like Sound and Fury, it's something about being in a theater that big with that many people. Like I want to say last summer, it was almost 2 years ago, which is insane. The last time we went to Sound and Fury was the Have Heart reunion. And that was probably the biggest example of that I've ever experienced. I'm like getting goosebumps. All I said was Have Heart reunion and I got goosebumps. But it's being in that room with that many people, like, especially with a band like Have Heart, which is so like sing along worthy. Just having that many people around you screaming these lyrics is something that, I don't know, it's like almost indescribable. I don't really even have words for it, but it's a pretty incredible experience, and it's something that I hope you get to experience when shows come back, that you can put the camera down for a bit and really like be there, because it's something else, let me tell you.
I think just in my brain, I'm always going to be like, how can I do something creative, even if I'm not like given that opportunity to document those sets because someone else is. So I don't know. I have thought about like, if I went down to Sound and Fury or LDB or This Is Hardcore, and I was just kind of a spectator, still creating something, whether it's like, I don't know, this hardcore fest from my perspective. And so even if I was doing like little, like recording little like songs just like from the crowd or whatever, and then like little interviews with people, like that might be something that I do. But at the same time, I've realized through this pandemic that A, I want to go to more festivals, and B, I'd like to go to 1 or 2 where I don't have to have like working mode Spencer thinking the entire time. And I hope people do the same. Right. I hope people recognize that life is very short, and like if they've been
Mhm.
wanting to go to a festival for the past 1, 2, 5, 10 years, that they make it happen by any means, like we were saying before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's gonna be crazy, I think. I try not to think too much about like what's gonna happen after the pandemic because I just think it's useless. I think we don't know what the hell is going on and we won't know until it happens. But I have a feeling it's good, hardcore especially is gonna come back
Hmm.
50 times stronger than it ever was before.
Yeah.
I think it's that having it taken away for the first time. And I've heard some people, like some of the old heads I know, like this is the first time I've gone longer than a few months without going to a show in like 2 decades, like
Yeah.
2, 3 decades. Like that's crazy. And I think that the people who kind of never really showed up to shows, they were like, oh, I'll go if it's convenient. I think those people are going to come out. And I hope we see a lot of new faces.
Yeah. Yeah,
But
people at home that like were maybe just getting into the realm of like listening to Knocked Loose, and then they just went and watched a bunch of sets through Hate 56 or whatever, and then
mm-hmm.
they're like just itching to have that true first show experience. Jessa,
Yeah.
I want to do a hard transition into a totally different topic that we haven't touched on yet
Mm-hmm.
before
What's up?
we have to do that. So anyone that knows you knows that you're a very avid and active vegan chef. So you have
I am.
not only are you doing like everyone's got to cook and make food, but
Yeah.
it seems like you've taken that being vegan and kind of try to build in some awareness with different recipes and different
Mm-hmm.
things, and shout out different places where you've gotten stuff. So I don't want to do the whole thing of like how'd you become vegan and all that stuff, because maybe
Yeah.
you can save that for another episode. But talk to me about just like the why behind like, okay, I'm making these meals for myself, but I want to put it out on an Instagram account or some kind of social media
Mm-hmm.
platform to hopefully educate people to consider that.
Mm-hmm. Sure. I guess me going vegan definitely has a lot to do with hardcore. It was Josh Bentley who was like the OG vegan in my life.
Mm-hmm.
Shortly before he was murdered, he went vegan, and we were all vegetarian at the time. And then it was knowing people like Kirsty Brooks who really like pushed me. And it was, I really like, part of me going vegan was super for like health reasons. It wasn't even like I was just like drinking a lot and I was like, I gotta eat better. But sharing it is something that, because again, I was like, I moved out to Canmore out in the mountains when I was 19. I was broke. I was drinking like 6 days a week, like not taking care of myself at all. Um, just like such a mess of a human being at that time in my life. And I still managed to go vegan and just like lost all this weight. I've never felt better in my whole life than I do on a vegan diet. And it started because I just wanted to show people like how easy it was, because it's so easy. And people are tons of misconceptions about how expensive it is to be vegan or how much more work it is. And I started sharing because I really just wanted to like show people how easy it was. And then that evolved into spending a lot of time in New York in my early 20s and out in Long Island going to shows. And I just like was like, this vegan food's incredible. Like there's so many good vegan restaurants everywhere. And then my travel started to kind of center around like, okay, I'm going for this show. But then when I'm going to this city for this show, I need to look up all of the vegan restaurants and I need to figure out where I need to go. And that's kind of like become a really fun part of my life. And I really love it. And now it's like, I've been vegan for so long. I feel like there's people constantly, you see people, especially on Twitter, who are like, oh, thinking about actually finally taking the plunge and going vegan, like any tips, any recipe ideas, whatever. And I just toss them that Instagram. Because it's easy. And haven't been as consistent with it as I would like to be, but it's got years and years and years of meals following like up and down through like my journeys of lifting a lot and being really into like building muscle to like hiking and camping meals to just being like bougie and spending like $40 on a meal just so I can take a picture of it and put it on the internet and like eat a feast, which is something me and Nikki do a lot. But yeah, I love being vegan. There's no reason why animals should suffer. And yeah, it definitely was the influence of Josh especially, but a lot of people in hardcore I feel like is you'll never see me go straight edge. Sorry, that's never gonna happen. But I'll take the V. I'll leave the X. I'll leave the X out, but I'll take the V. Thanks.
No, that's too funny. Yeah, I think hardcore and punk music have definitely influenced a lot of people to consider being straight edge, consider being vegan. You know, but at the same time, I've definitely learned over the years that, you know, not everyone should be straight edge, not everyone should be vegan. You know, there's a bunch of different layers to that, but I definitely think that I think personally overall, if more people were just eating vegetarian or vegan in general versus like trying to think about what's the meat that I'm having every single day, that would still be a huge step in the right direction. But I do think, like you were saying, like there's people who maybe like the idea of vegan food because it does taste really, really good. But you know, the presentation is there, but on the day to day, like I have to make my lunch for work, or I need to like, you know, make supper for me and my partner, or just make a quick breakfast. What's kind of like the biggest vegan cooking hack that you've, you know, put into your daily ritual over the years that you could share with people?
That's hard because it's changed. Veganism is so much more accessible now than it was when I went vegan. I'm coming up on 7 years. So 2014 was when I went vegan in the first place. And so you didn't see half of the vegan products we have now. So that's definitely changed a lot over the years. But the biggest thing is don't let the label of like being vegan stop you, I think is the biggest piece of advice I give people, because a lot of people look at veganism as something that's similar to like sobriety, where it's like all or nothing. You can't drink once a week and be like, I'm sober. Like I'm a sober person. I'm straight edge, but I smoke cigarettes on Friday. It's like that's not a thing. Whereas I feel like, of course, like don't call yourself a vegan and be like, yeah, I'm vegan if you are not, you know, 100% plant-based, but don't let that stop you from eating. Every time you eat breakfast, make it vegan, or every time you eat lunch, make it vegan, or eat vegan when you're making food at home. And then maybe don't be like, if that's too much for you, like you can eat, you know, don't be as restrictive when you're out. I think is one of the biggest things that people can do to still do their part as far as the environment goes, their health, and just like the movement, but without it being this big daunting thing. A lot of us, especially I find a lot of us in hardcore, like go vegan because it's like, it's the whole conviction of like my overall lifestyle. But I think it stops a lot of people. I think that misconception that it's all or nothing stops a lot of people. And it's math. You get two people that eat vegan half the time. Those two people combined are still doing more than two people who don't even try, because it just seems like this big thing to change in your life. And I always tell people too, they're like, oh, is being vegan hard? Like changing anything you've been doing for 20 plus years. Cause most of the people who have been asking me this, they're in their 20s. Yeah. Anything you have been doing since the day you were born for years and years and years and years is going to be hard to change. Yeah. That's just a fact of life.
No different than working out or like being good with money.
Exactly.
Like, yeah.
There's no difference. And eating is the one thing that we have all been doing intentionally since the day we were born. Yeah. Whether that's because we're just eating the food that's put on our table, or, you know, we started cooking for ourselves as teenagers, or it didn't come until adulthood. Either way, you've been eating a certain way for decades. So that is obviously going to be a hard thing to change and adjust. But like, man, it's worth it. It's so good.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. Just like, you know, if there's anything that I've learned from Nikki is like, don't make something in hardcore, or just like, don't base something just as your personality trait. Like, like being vegan for a lot of people, like, is their identity. And I think you should be proud of who you are and what you do. But don't let that just be like the only thing that, you know, makes you you. So I
Mhm.
think that a lot of people just default into like you were saying, like try to be that all or nothing, but still a bunch of good things can come for yourself and the world, even if you're just slowly introducing one meal in your week as vegan, and then that becomes 2, and then it becomes 3, and then
Also, anyone that makes
snowball effect.
excuses for not being vegan now, like
Yeah,
at this
yeah,
point,
definitely.
cowards, all of you. You can go to KFC and get a vegan burger.
Yeah.
Cowards. Like, come on,
It's
figure it out.
honestly crazy that like people just even in like coworkers of mine, like I'll be like, yeah, I'm vegetarian, like you know, Beyond Meat burger is my shit, and they're like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, I still haven't tried, and I'm like, why? Like, what's the reason that
Yeah.
you're so like it needs to be like Alberta beef, baby? Like, it doesn't need to be that. Like, you know,
Yeah.
if you have a curiosity around vegan food, vegetarian, like just trying to make a change, like just
Mhm.
like Jessa said, just start small. Small changes can lead to bigger results over time. Doesn't need to be a
Doesn't need to be
0 to
overnight.
hero
No, it doesn't.
thing.
Exactly. It doesn't need to be overnight.
Yeah.
But
Well, Jessa, we should start wrapping up the show here, and the
yeah.
last portion, as you know, is a favorite mosh story to share with the listeners. So that doesn't need to be necessarily something that happened to you or that you
Yeah, it's
did,
not gonna
or
be.
it's not gonna be. I'm not
No.
gonna call myself out.
Not expose myself like that. Are you kidding me? Okay, so I've been thinking about this all week and it's so hard. I don't even know how to narrow it down. But I already brought up the have heart thing. That's like the favorite moment of my entire life.
Sure.
Probably is the have heart reading Sound and Fury in 2019. Um, and it's a toss up. It's going to be a toss up here between Stepping Stone, Wild Rose 2019, Nikki the stripper, and her $5 pickup. Don't know why. I've like this girl, I was so hungover, and this girl comes up to me and she's like, yeah, I think I'm just gonna take over the Stepping Stone set, and I'm gonna jump on a box and just like fan out $300 in $5 bills. Why? I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. But hilarious. Funniest thing I've ever seen. Nathan in the middle was just like, he's like made some comment about if you stop dancing to pick up the bills. Like, shout out to the people who kept dancing instead of like the crowd of people. Like,
That are
it
like,
was just ridiculous.
I need merch money.
Yeah, like the funniest thing I've ever seen. So that was probably funniest, but not really like a mosh story, but definitely like a show story.
Yeah. Definitely.
Mosh story would probably be, I went to this was a couple of years ago now, but I went to Long Island for a incendiary. I was already in Long Island, but it happened to be the week of the incendiary 10-year anniversary show at Amityville Music Hall. And let me just say, like, seeing that band in like their hometown space was probably one of the most incredible things I've ever seen. And that bill was Downpresser, Vane, and this is before Vane really like blew up. This is before the Vane. This
is like their
set, I
demo,
believe.
like EP.
Yeah, this is like early Vane. Had they played? No, they either just played This Is Hardcore or not until the following year. So like very early Vane days. And Jukai, which as somebody that lives in the middle of Western Canada, the fact that I can say I saw Jukai live is like kind of crazy to me. But favorite mosh story would be Downpresser was playing, and like, you know, Downpresser with all their like super dope like bass riffs. And just like all these people from Long Island. So it's Downpresser from California, right? Across literally the other side of the country. And all of these kids from Long Island just like so low to the ground, just fucking going. And like one dude just goes and like rolls over these people's backs. And it was just such a dope moment. I just love Downpresser. I love seeing big bands from other parts of the country going somewhere and seeing a reaction like that.
Yeah.
And just the room. Somebody asked on Twitter the other day, what is the most people you've ever seen moshing to a band in one room? during a set, and that incendiary set has to be it. I've never seen so many people going off for the same set in such a not a huge setting. Obviously, the volume of people I've seen at like Sound and Fury and stuff, but to see an entire room
moshing more passionately versus just by bodies.
Moshing to incendiary was like pretty insane. So yeah.
Two great stories.
That's got to be the stories I have to tell, because there are plenty of I thought someone was going to crack their head open stories from like the death trap and stuff like that, but it's whatever. Someone else will tell those.
I love the visual of someone just rolling on someone's backs like it's like playing
you know
Donkey
what I mean?
Kong
Like
64.
everyone was like down, like just like stomping towards the ground, and then just one dude just fucking goes and like just like rolls over everyone's backs. It was quite the sight.
That's hilarious. Well, Jessa, this has been a blast. I'm really glad to have you as a part of the season 100 package. You're someone that I not only respect a lot in hardcore, but look up to and feel inspired by on the daily. You're one of my best friends in this whole goddamn scene, so I appreciate you. I love you. Anything you want to plug, shout out before we wrap it up officially here?
Not really. When shows come back, please show up. We're going to be putting in a lot of work, like ready to go as soon as it's safe and healthy to do so.
Definitely.
I hope that the border is not a hot mess, and I hope that we can have a lot of friends from down in the US come up as soon as that starts. So if you're listening, especially if you're in Calgary, please show up and support the bands that are going to want to come through. Support promoters in your cities, help people find venues. If you have any sort of resources, keep that in mind as later in the year, hopefully shows start going again. Shout out to Set Straight, kids are all right. Shout out to Abrasion from California, and shout out to you. Thank you for everything you do with Scoped. I'm really stoked to have been on here and excited to see what we get to cook up this year together. It's gonna be fun.
Yeah, I feel like anyone who has come into the Scoped universe in the last year and realize that we do more than just podcasts and playlists. Like we do shows and film shows, but I feel like what would have been the Scope 3 year is going to be an absolute behemoth for the 4 year or whatever.
Trust us when we say it's gonna be
lots of
huge.
But again, Jessa, thank you for coming on the podcast, and that's it.